I'm Elizabeth, but most people call me Liz or Lizzie, and some even call me Betty, though I've never liked that name. It always felt foreign to me, as if it didn't quite match my inner self. I grew up in a family that could be described as simple and ordinary: mom, dad, and my older sister Kate. Kate was 7 years older than me, a significant age gap, but from the very beginning, I could feel her influence on our family, as if her age wasn't just a number, but the very foundation of our home. The house, by the way, was a real temple to Kate. On the walls hung photos of her first steps, her first drawings, her first school awards. Even her crooked scribbles were treated like Picasso's masterpieces by Mom and Dad. And me? I was just there. Ordinary, quiet, unnoticed. I played with her old toys, wore her hand-me-down clothes, and lived in the shadow of that perfect child. I can't say it bothered me much, because I didn't know any other way. My place in the family was clear from the start. I was meant to be unnoticed, silent, and unobtrusive. As time went on, things stayed the same. Kate got all the new things: toys, clothes, even decorations for her room. And I got her old stuff. This was the family dynamic, and it seemed normal. I never complained, never pouted, never asked for more. I simply existed. When I started middle school, Kate had already gone off to college. I thought that maybe now, perhaps, my parents would pay more attention to me. But no. Their life still revolved around Kate. They talked about her grades, her new friends, her boyfriends. And, of course, her bright future. And I remained just a quiet witness to this parade of admiration. But the real turning point came one Sunday afternoon, when Kate burst into our house, shining like the sun, with the loud announcement, "Mom, Dad, I'm getting married." It felt as if she had just announced she had invented a cure for all diseases. Mom cried, Dad shouted with joy. Their faces glowed with pride, their eyes sparkled with true happiness. And me? I just sat in the corner of the room, trying not to look out of place. It was only when Kate suddenly turned to me and said, "Lizzie, you'll be my bridesmaid, won't you?" that I felt like I still existed. I smiled as best I could and nodded, though inside, I was overwhelmed with conflicting emotions. Kate's wedding became the event of the year, if not the decade. All our relatives and friends talked about her dress, the decorations, the menu. At night, I could hear my parents whispering in the kitchen. One day, as I passed by, I overheard Dad, gritting his teeth, say, "We'll have to go into debt for this day." And Mom sighed quietly and whispered, "It's Kate. We can't let her down." I clenched my fists in frustration. I wanted to say it was unfair, that they were putting her happiness above their own stability, but I kept silent. Who in this house cared about my opinion? The wedding was extravagant. Kate looked like a princess, and our parents beamed with pride. And I stood next to her, in my bridesmaid dress, feeling even more invisible than ever. All the attention was on Kate, and it seemed like the world beyond her smile simply didn't exist. After the honeymoon, Kate dropped another bombshell on us, which, as it turned out, would mark the beginning of a new chapter in our family drama. "I've decided to become a stay-at-home wife," Kate announced at Sunday dinner, her voice so confident, as if she had just declared a new stage in her life that was meant to inspire us all. "Jack earns enough for both of us." Mom and Dad exchanged glances, and I noticed a flicker of concern in their eyes. But in the next moment, their faces lit up with forced smiles. "That's wonderful, dear," Mom said, her voice so sweet it almost sounded sickly. "If that makes you happy." Inside, I was boiling. They had gone into debt for her wedding, and now she was planning to quit her job without even trying to contribute to their financial stability. I wanted to scream, but instead, I just stared at my plate, scattering food around it. Months passed, and Kate announced that she was pregnant with twins. Our parents were ecstatic, as if they had just won the lottery. Twins. Dad kept repeating, struggling to believe his own ears. "Can you believe it?" I could. I could believe, and not only that, but also what happened next. "We need to help them buy a house," Mom suggested one evening, her voice filled with enthusiasm, as if this idea was the greatest achievement of her life. With 2 kids on the way, they'll need more space. Dad nodded. We can cover the down payment on the mortgage. There's a nice place nearby. This time, I couldn't stay silent. Are you serious? I blurted out, unable to hide my outrage. You're already in debt from Kate's wedding, and now you want to buy her a house. They looked at me as if they had just realized I was sitting at the table. Elizabeth, Mom said, her tone stern, as if I had done something unforgivable. We're family. We help each other. A few months later, the twins were born. 2 boys, as sweet as little teddy bears. Our parents were overjoyed, spending every free minute in Kate's new house, cooing over the babies as if they were a new masterpiece of the family legacy. And me? I was finishing high school and trying to figure out my next steps. College was the obvious choice, but how was I going to pay for it? One evening, I gathered all my courage and asked, Mom, Dad, I've been looking at colleges. That's good, dear, Mom replied, not taking her eyes off the photo album with new pictures of the twins. I was wondering, could you help me pay for it? I continued, trying not to lose my confidence. They exchanged another glance, and their faces seemed to tighten with guilt. Well, dear, Dad began, clearly trying to find the right words. We'd love to help, but with the loan for Kate's wedding and the new house. We can cover half, Mom interrupted, her voice as stern as it had been that evening at dinner. But the rest you'll have to figure out on your own. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Half. That was all they could do after everything they had done for Kate. But I knew it was pointless to argue. Okay, I replied quietly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Thank you. I got up and went to my room. Closing the door behind me, I leaned against it and, for the first time in years, allowed myself to cry. The college of my dreams was out of reach. Instead, I enrolled in the local community college, which I could afford by combining my parents' PAF with the money I earned working as a waitress at a diner. Serving tables and trying to keep up with my coursework wasn't easy. Every night, I came home exhausted, dreaming only of my bed. But even that tiny comfort was often taken from me. In the rare moments when I came home earlier than usual, my parents were invariably at Kate's new house. Their entire world revolved around the twins, and once again, I had to find my strength in solitude. It started one Friday evening. I had just finished a grueling shift at the diner, and all I could think about was getting to my bed and burying my face in the pillow. But when I walked into the house, the scene before me immediately knocked the last bit of enthusiasm out of my tired body. In the living room, Kate was sitting, with the twins crawling around her feet. One was wailing loudly, while the other, clutching a toy car in his fist, was methodically banging it on the floor. "Oh, Lizzie!" Kate exclaimed, lifting her head. Her face lit up with joy, as if my appearance was the answer to her prayers. "Thank God, you're home." I was about to lose my mind with these two. Jack and I haven't had a date in forever. Before I could say anything, she grabbed her purse, headed for the door, and vanished as if she had never been there. "Wait." "What?" was all I could mutter, staring at the closed door. Then I turned my gaze to the 2 3-year-olds, whose faces were lit with both curiosity and a hidden mischief. "What the hell?" I exhaled. Mom walked into the room, rubbing her hands with a towel as if everything happening was perfectly normal. "Your sister is tired, Lizzie," she said in a gently reproachful tone. "This is what family does. Besides, it will be good practice when you have your own kids." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words got stuck in my throat. She didn't even notice my expression, as if my opinion on the matter already didn't matter. I sighed heavily and sat on the carpet next to the twins. It became routine. Every weekend, Kate would bring the twins and disappear, leaving them with me. Sometimes she said she needed to go to the store. Sometimes she mentioned a movie with Jack or dinner with friends. I tried not to complain, but my resentment grew. One Saturday, after an especially stressful week of exams, I finally cracked. As soon as Kate slipped out of the house, leaving the twins crying with frustration, I turned to my parents. "Mom, Dad," I started, trying to keep my calm. "This isn't fair. I'm exhausted. I work, I study, and now I'm supposed to give up my weekends to watch Kate's kids." Dad only put down his newspaper for a couple of seconds to give me a tired look. "Lizzie, your sister needs help. You should be happy to do this," he mumbled, going back to his reading. I couldn't believe my ears. "And what about me?" I blurted out in desperation. Mom sighed and looked at me as if I were a little child throwing a tantrum for no reason. "Elizabeth, don't be selfish," she said with emphasis. "Kate has 2 kids. You have no idea how hard it is." I gave up. It was obvious that arguing was pointless. Their world revolved around Kate and her twins, and my wants and needs simply didn't exist in that equation. Week after week, I shuffled between classes, work, and my unpaid role as a nanny on weekends. My personal life essentially didn't exist. The only date I had was a polite, social chat with customers at the diner, and sleep became a luxury. At some point, I realized I needed a break. A real one. Away from all the chaos. "Mom, Dad," I said one evening, gathering my courage. "I'm taking a few days off and heading to the beach." I expected protests, complaints, or at least some sideways glances, but their reaction surprised me. "That's wonderful, Lizzie," Mom exclaimed with a genuine smile. "Where are you going to stay?" "In an inexpensive motel by the ocean," I replied. "Nothing special, but it's all I can afford." Dad nodded approvingly. "Good for you, kid. You deserve it." I nearly collapsed from shock. For the first time in a long while, they had actually acknowledged my needs. Finally, the day I had been looking forward to arrived. I packed a small bag, hopped on the bus, and immediately felt the weight of all my worries and responsibilities begin to lift with every mile I traveled. The city with its noise, obligations, and constant demands started fading into the past, giving way to the promise of the peace I had been searching for. When I arrived at the coast, a sense of unreality washed over me. The motel was tiny and slightly worn, but the view from the window of the endless ocean was absolutely breathtaking. The sunlight danced gently on the waves, their sparkle filling me with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in so long. I quickly tossed my bag in the room and headed straight for the beach. The salty smell of the sea filled my lungs, refreshing and freeing me from all the built-up burdens. I felt like, for the first time in months, I could just breathe. Later, I went to a cozy cafe right by the shore and ordered lunch. Every bite of food, every minute spent alone, was bliss. No screaming children, no work, no demands, just me, my thoughts, and the rhythmic sound of waves crashing on the sand. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, I returned to the motel, planning an evening filled with calm and silence. But my plan turned out to be just a dream. As I approached my room, I heard familiar voices. I froze in place, unable to believe my ears. From the neighboring room came sounds I'd recognize anywhere: Mom, Kate, and the twins, who were already running around, creating the usual chaos. "Lizzie." Mom called to me, her voice filled with feigned joy. "We couldn't let you spend your vacation alone, so we decided to join you." I was stunned. My heart froze. "You, what?" I mumbled, trying to process her words. "We booked a room next door," she continued, as if everything was completely normal. I briefly noticed their suitcases near the door to a more spacious room. Clearly, they had chosen a better option than what I could afford. I felt a wave of irritation rise within me, but before I could say a word, Kate was already pushing the twins toward me. "They really wanted to see the ocean," she said. "Do you mind looking after them for a bit? I'm going for a walk on the beach and to the store." Mom added, "We'll be back soon, sweetie." Before I could protest in any way, they disappeared, leaving me standing with 2 overly excited 3-year-olds, who immediately started pulling on my arms and demanding attention. That weekend turned out to be the worst of my life. The twins wreaked absolute havoc in my tiny room. They tore the curtains, broke a glass, and at one point somehow shoved apples into the toilet, which required a plumber. All of my modest savings for this vacation went toward repairs and paying for services. By the end of the weekend, I was more exhausted than I had ever been. The final straw came when Kate, returning in the evening, had the audacity to complain about how tiring the trip had been. "You have no idea how hard this is," she said. That was it. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Everything I had been bottling up for years came rushing out. I shouted. Mom cried. Kate defended herself, and the twins cried hysterically. It all blended into one big nightmare. That night, I packed my bags and left for home on the first bus in the morning. As I watched the coastline disappear out the window, I felt that something inside me had changed. It couldn't go on like this. Something had to change. When I got home, the exhaustion hit me like a wave. Dad, sitting in his chair in front of the TV, barely muttered a greeting without even looking away from the screen. I collapsed onto my bed. My thoughts were all jumbled, but one thing was clear: I couldn't do this anymore. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. As I was gathering my things, I heard the front door slam. Mom's voice rang out, loud and irritated. "Elizabeth. Where are you?" She appeared in the doorway, her face burning with anger. "I can't believe you just left us there," she spat. "Do you have any idea how hard it was to handle the twins by myself?" I held back the retort about how I had almost always been the one to take care of the twins on my own. Instead, I kept packing, avoiding making eye contact with her. Her voice wavered, and her eyes narrowed when she noticed me carefully folding my few belongings into a suitcase. "What are you doing?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. "I'm leaving," I said, trying to make my voice sound firm, though inside I was shaking. "I need my own life." Their reaction was instant, predictable, and, strangely, almost mechanical. "How can you be so selfish?" Mom shrieked, her eyes filling with tears. "After everything we've done for you." Dad turned red with anger, his voice, always louder and more authoritative, cut through the air like a knife. "Ungrateful little girl. Did you even think about your sister? Who's going to help her with the twins now?" I felt something snap inside me. For the first time in many years, that snapping spring didn't mean holding back my feelings, it meant an explosion. "My sister?" I blurted out, barely recognizing my own voice. "What about me? When has anyone in this family ever thought about what I need?" "Elizabeth." Mom gasped, as if I had just uttered a curse. "No, I'm serious," I continued, no longer able to stop. "Kate has a husband. Let him help her with the kids. I need to focus on my own life. I can't do this anymore." Dad stood up from his chair, his face hardening like stone. "Listen here, young lady," his voice became threatening. "If you walk out that door, don't expect us to pay for your college. You'll be on your own." I looked at both of them, these people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. In that moment, I realized they were strangers to me. "All right," I said, zipping up my suitcase. "I'd rather be alone than keep living like this." I squeezed past them, dragging my suitcase down the stairs while their shouting continued behind me. Mom was crying, Dad was yelling. But I tuned them out. When I reached for the doorknob, Mom made one last desperate attempt. "If you leave now, don't you dare come back." I paused for a moment, then, without looking back, I opened the door and stepped into the unknown. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I temporarily stayed with a classmate, whose couch became my new home while I searched for a more permanent solution. Soon, I got in touch with a girl from my study group who was also looking for a roommate. Together, we found a tiny apartment that we could barely afford between the two of us. Since my parents had completely cut me off financially, I had to pick up extra shifts at the diner. I worked nearly full-time while continuing my studies. At night, I collapsed onto a mattress on the floor, feeling the exhaustion seep into my bones. There were moments when I thought I wouldn't make it, when my thoughts were tangled and my eyes would close on their own, even in the middle of a shift. But you know what? For the first time in my life, I felt free. No one demanded my time, no one accused me of neglecting my needs for the sake of others. That tiny apartment, modest and uncomfortable, was mine. And for the first time, I could call something my own. I threw myself into my studies with a determination I hadn't even known I had. Every night, every missed party, every extra shift was dedicated to a future that finally seemed within reach. 2 years flew by unnoticed. On the day of my graduation, I sat in a crowded auditorium, waiting for my name to be called. The room was filled with noise, laughter, congratulations. People were hugging their parents, taking pictures with their families. A small part of me still hoped to see familiar faces, Mom, Dad, even Kate. But the seats I had reserved for them remained empty. Life after college marked a new chapter for me. I landed a job at a marketing firm. Suddenly, I had a steady income that no longer went toward endless debts and the whims of others. My future began to take shape in clear lines, and I realized that, despite all the pain, I had broken free from the shadows that had held me down. For the first time in many years, I could breathe easily. I had my own apartment, nothing special, but it was my space. No roommates, no family drama. Silence and peace became my constant companions, and let me tell you, it was wonderful. I began doing the ordinary things I had been unable to do for so long. I went on dates, made new friends, tried my hand at different hobbies. There were even a couple of short-term relationships, nothing serious, but it was nice. Just being young, carefree, and free from the constant expectations from my family was something new to me. The connection with my parents was still there, though it was quite superficial. We talked maybe once a month, and those conversations were always awkward. Their voices carried a hidden disapproval, and I wasn't in any hurry to rebuild bridges. They were still angry about my leaving, and I felt no need to apologize. Then came my 25th birthday. I had plans to meet up with friends, nothing big, just dinner and cocktails. But a week before, my mom called. Elizabeth, her voice sounded surprisingly cheerful, almost too much so. We want you to come here for your birthday. The whole family will be here. I hesitated. Everything inside me screamed no, but for some reason, I agreed. When I arrived at my parents' house, it felt like stepping back in time. Everything was the same. Kate and her husband were sitting in the living room, and the twins, now 7 years old, were running around the house like little tornadoes. Aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the space, each trying to hug me and wish me well. "Happy birthday, Lizzie," they all shouted in unison, as if that could undo years of tension. I forced a smile, accepting the hugs and formal greetings. Then came the presents. Books, clothes, gift cards, all as expected. But then Mom handed me an envelope with a look on her face as if it were the key to the kingdom of heaven. "This is from all of us," she said, beaming. I opened the envelope, and my heart sank. Inside were tickets to a beach resort. "We're all going together," Dad proudly announced. "A big family vacation. All paid for." I froze. A family vacation. With the twins. All I could see in my mind was my ruined beach trip from a few years ago. "You must be kidding," I mumbled, but before I could say anything else, Mom gripped my hand tightly and whispered, "Don't you dare make a scene in front of everyone." I smiled as best as I could and thanked them, but inside, everything was boiling. When the relatives left and only Mom, Dad, Kate, and her family remained in the house, I finally made up my mind. "I'm not going," I said flatly. Kate gasped. "But it's a family trip." Her voice was filled with hurt. "I'm not interested in spending another vacation looking after your kids," I replied. Kate started crying. "You don't love us at all." You don't even care about your nieces and nephews. I do care, I answered coldly. But if I wanted kids, I'd have my own. The argument erupted immediately. Mom called me ungrateful, Dad looked as though I had betrayed their trust, and Kate, sobbing, complained about how hard it was to be a mother. They tried to convince me that I should do it for the sake of the family, but I remained firm. Fine, I finally said, my voice tired. I'll go. They looked relieved, as if they had won some great battle. The day of departure came, and I found myself at the airport, surrounded by my overly cheerful family. Kate and her husband were glowing, like kids about to go on the vacation of their dreams. We're so happy you're coming with us, Lizzie, Mom said, her voice surprisingly gentle. Kate was already making plans for how she and Jack would have romantic evenings at the resort. You'll have so much fun with Aunt Lizzie, she chirped, looking at the twins. I stood off to the side, unable to find words to describe how trapped I felt. Kate told the boys, winking at me. Shrek, we'll take you to the beach, build sandcastles, maybe even do some scuba diving. Mom and Dad were also beaming, picking up on her enthusiasm, their voices ringing in unison. How nice it will be if Kate gets a little rest. And once again, as always, no one thought about what I might want to do with my vacation. It was clear that for the whole family, I was nothing more than a convenient babysitter for the kids. I was part of their plans, but no more than that. Again, I became a shadow, elusive, yet essential to their perfect picture. When we reached the check-in meeting, I made my move. My voice sounded slightly theatrical, just to avoid drawing attention. Oh, guys, I need to use the bathroom, I paused, adding with a look of apologetic innocence. You go ahead, check in, I'll catch up with you, meet you at the gate. They nodded, absorbed in yet another luggage-related dispute in the excited kids, and, not noticing anything suspicious, continued on their way to the check-in desk. I turned and quickly walked in the opposite direction. My heart was pounding as I approached another checkpoint. My hands were slightly trembling, but I handed over my passport and ticket with determination. In that moment, I felt the weight of the pressure on me start to lift. I passed through security, and then, surveying the crowded airport, I found a quiet corner where I could be alone with myself. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I opened the messages and typed a short but firm note to my mom. I'm not going with you. I'm going on vacation, enjoying the trip. I pressed send without taking a breath and turned off my phone, as if by that gesture, I could momentarily stop the storm that was sure to come later. Once I settled into my seat on the plane, the feeling of liberation washed over me again. I briefly turned my phone back on, and it immediately exploded with notifications, missed calls, voicemails, angry texts. The voicemails were full of furious cries from my mom. Elizabeth Morgan, how dare you abandon your family? You ruined everything. Your sister is in tears, her husband is furious. They were counting on you to watch the boys. You're the most selfish and ungrateful. But I no longer felt their words affect me. On the contrary, as I sipped champagne and gazed out the window, I suddenly felt light. The guilt still lingered somewhere in the back of my mind, but it felt distant and insignificant. I knew I would have to face the consequences. There would be calls, accusations, possibly another scene where I'd be called selfish and a traitor, but for now, I didn't care. As the plane took off, I felt a wave of freedom wash over me, like never before. For the first time in many years, I wasn't anyone's responsibility. I was going to spend this time for me, without family problems, without the ever-growing demands, without crying kids, without tears and accusations. Just me, the beach, and whatever I wanted to do. When the plane landed on the small tropical island, I felt the weight I had been carrying for years slip off my shoulders. The warm breeze that greeted me seemed to whisper, "Welcome to freedom." I checked in at my resort, modest but charming, right on the beach. As soon as I unpacked and felt safe, curiosity got the better of me, and I turned on my phone. It exploded again, hundreds of notifications, missed calls, voicemails filled with accusations, and messages asking where I was. I knew this was my moment. The moment when I could look back on everything I had left behind and feel that, this time, I was doing something just for me. And though the storm of their reproaches and anger stirred within me once again, I left the phone on the bed, returning to the moment of complete silence, surrounded only by the sound of the waves and the evening light. I was finally in my place. I scrolled through the messages, and with every word, with every accusation, my inner peace only grew stronger. How could you do this to us, Mom? You ruined everything. Kate, you're so selfish. Elizabeth, Dad, these words sounded like echoes from another world, a world that was no longer mine. This time, I chose myself. For the first time in many years, I allowed myself to be selfish, and not only was it liberating, but it was also joyful. I turned off my phone, threw it in the hotel safe, and relished the feeling of being unreachable. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need to hide my feelings behind a mask of guilt. And what a week it was. I blissfully lay on the beach, read the books I'd been putting off, dove into the underwater world, and even tried my hand at surfing. I struck up random conversations with other vacationers, went on a few dates, and didn't fear waking up at any hour of the day or night. It was strange, but surprisingly pleasant, to realize that no one expected anything from me. No schedules, no obligations, no children's screams. Just me and the rhythm of the waves, gently breaking on the sand and carrying all my worries away. But as much as I enjoyed this time, it came to an end. The moment of return arrived, and when I got back to my apartment, I felt how the weight I hadn't even realized I had been carrying for years slowly began to melt away. My spirit was rested and focused, but I knew the real world was waiting at the door. I expected everything to go back to the way it was, that my parents, as always, would try to insert themselves into my life, attempting to dictate what I should do. And sure enough, the next morning, just as I had shaken off the sleep, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, my eyes met the furious, tear-streaked faces of my mom and Kate. My mom barged in, not giving me a chance to respond. "How dare you? Do you even realize what you've done? You've ruined everything." Her voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the air. Kate didn't hold back, her words pouring out like rain, disorienting me. "You ruined our entire vacation." The boys were devastated, they were stuck in the tide, they didn't understand what was going on. I let them rant for a few minutes, as if it wasn't about me. Their words washed over me, leaving no trace. Then, when the noise became unbearable, I spoke, and my voice, calm and confident, sliced through their indignation. "Enough," I said, not yielding to any of their accusations. "I don't owe you anything, not money, not childcare, not my time. I'm an adult, and I can make my own choices." My mom opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my hand, stopping her. "I'm not going to discuss this," I said firmly. "Please leave. When you're ready to treat me with respect and have a calm conversation, we can talk. Until then, I think it's best we don't communicate." They were silent. It was hard for all of us, but for me, necessary. They stared at me in shock, then uttered a few more words here and there before finally leaving. When the door slammed behind them, I took a deep breath. There was no sense of relief, but there was satisfaction. I had finally said what I should have said a long time ago. In the next few weeks, I made major changes in my life. I found a new apartment in a different part of the city and moved, not telling my family my new address. I threw myself into work like never before, then discovered new hobbies, drawing, yoga, and even started learning a new language. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, feelings of guilt trying to creep into my mind, but every time I came home to my quiet apartment, every time I made plans just for myself without worrying about taking care of the kids, I knew I had made the right choice. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day my family and I will find a way to build healthy relationships. Maybe not. But one thing I know for sure, I will face whatever comes on my own terms. I stand tall and I don't apologize for the life I've chosen for myself.